I didn't discover my husband's affair from a sweet text message, nor from a hushed phone call. It was a bank transaction, a seemingly meaningless number that had the power to shatter my 5-year marriage in a matter of seconds. That night, I had just flown back to Chicago from a 5-day business trip in San Francisco. I was exhausted, my head spinning from back-to-back meetings. All I wanted was to get home, take a hot shower, and fall into a deep sleep. In the Uber from O'Hare, I took a moment to open my phone and check the joint bank account I shared with my husband. It was a habit I'd maintained for years, as I was the one who managed our finances. I wasn't suspicious, just simply wanting to see the expenses while I was away. But then my eyes froze on a line item that made my heart stop. A hotel charge for $450. If it had been just one, I might have dismissed it. But below it were 2 more identical charges, each exactly 24 hours apart. A total of over $1,300 in just 3 days. I frowned. My husband Dean was not a wasteful person, and he certainly wasn't the type to randomly book a hotel room while his wife was out of town. I scrolled down further and another transaction appeared. Airline tickets, 2 people, Chicago to Miami. My heart pounded. 2 people. I wasn't on that flight. So who was I? Bit my lip trying to stay calm to find a logical explanation. Maybe it was a work trip with a client and the company would reimburse him, so he used the joint account for now. But another thought, cold and sharp, immediately cut through. If it was for work, why hadn't he told me? The Uber pulled up to our condo building, but I didn't get out. My phone screen was still lit, those cold numbers staring back at me as if to insist that things were not as simple as I wanted them to be. I took a deep breath, paid the driver, and dragged my suitcase inside. The apartment was dark and silent. I flipped on the living room lights, and the sudden brightness made the space feel strangely empty. Normally, no matter where I went, Dean would be home, or at least there'd be some sign of life, a glass on the counter, a jacket draped over a chair. But tonight, everything was unusually tidy. I called his phone. It rang a few times, then went to voicemail. I texted him, "Where are you?" A moment later, he replied, "Out of town for work. Be back tomorrow." I stared at that message. Work. There was that word again. But now, after seeing those transactions, it no longer felt simple. I walked quickly into our bedroom and opened the closet. A gap stared back at me. A few of his favorite outfits were gone, and his small carry-on suitcase was missing. I turned to his desk. His laptop was gone too. All the signs pointed to one thing: he was away, and this trip had been planned. I sat on the edge of the bed phone, still in hand, when an idea struck me. I reopened the banking app and clicked on the transaction details. The location of the charge was clearly listed Miami Beach. My throat went dry. Miami Beach, a vacation destination, not typically a place for a last-minute business trip. I gripped the phone, my heart starting to race. Then, like a reflex, I picked up the iPad from the nightstand, the one we both shared. I never made a habit of checking it, but right now I needed an answer. The screen lit up. The iMessage app was still open. A conversation pulled up on the screen. The name at the top was Clear Grace. I froze for a second. Grace, my sister-in-law. A chill ran down my spine, but I tried to reassure myself. Maybe they were just talking, maybe it was about family. But when I opened the thread, my last shred of hope crumbled. The beach is so beautiful today. I love being here with you like this. No one knows us here. It's so much more relaxing. You picked a great room. I can't believe how private it is. The words were crystal clear. There was no need for interpretation. I scrolled up. A long history of messages stretched back for days, even months. Intimate conversations, plans for dates, photos taken together, faces obscured, but it was enough. The beach, a swimming pool, a restaurant, 2 cocktails side by side, a towel draped over someone's bare shoulder. I let the iPad fall onto the bed, my hands shaking. There were no more doubts, no more maybes, only the raw, undeniable truth. My husband and my sister-in-law. Strangely, I didn't cry. I just felt empty, as if all my emotions had been vacuumed out. I remembered all the family dinners, the times Grace would smile and call me Alice in that sweet voice of hers. I remembered all the times my husband came home late claiming he was busy with work. It all made sense now. I just hadn't seen it. Or maybe I hadn't wanted to. I stood up and walked into the living room as if to escape the suffocating space. I asked myself what I should do. Call and scream, cry. Stay silent. But after only a few seconds, I had my answer. If I made a scene now, they would deny it. They would delete all the evidence and I would be painted as the hysterical, jealous wife. No, I wasn't that foolish. I went back into the bedroom, picked up the iPad, and took screenshots of the entire conversation. Then I opened my phone and booked a flight. The earliest one from Chicago to Miami popped up. I didn't hesitate. My finger pressed confirm. Transaction successful. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, then turned it off. The apartment was silent again. But this time, I no longer felt empty. Something inside me had shifted. I was no longer the woman who trusted her husband unconditionally, no longer the wife who would suffer in silence. I looked out the window. The city lights were still bright, and I was just waiting for the morning. Because this time, I wasn't going to ask. I was going to see it with my own eyes. I didn't sleep at all that night, not because of the pain, but because my mind was terrifyingly clear. The more I thought, the more every little detail from the past few months came into focus, like a movie playing in slow motion. Dean coming home late more often, the phone calls he always took out on the balcony, the times he said he had to meet clients on weekends, and the times Grace was suddenly absent from family dinners claiming she was visiting her parents or had other plans. Before, I never connected the dots. But tonight they fit together with a chilling, perfect precision. By 5 a.m., I was at the airport. I didn't pack much, just a small bag, enough for a trip I didn't know how long would last. I didn't text my husband or leave any sign that I had discovered the truth. In my mind, there was only one goal: get to Miami and confirm everything with my own eyes. I didn't want to be wrong. I couldn't afford to be wrong. On the plane, I opened the photos I'd saved from the iPad. Every message, every picture. I read them again this time, more slowly, more carefully. And then a detail caught my eye. In one exchange, Grace had written, "This hotel gets great reviews, and it's so private." Dean had replied, "I booked it. An oceanfront suite. Don't worry, no one will bother us. An oceanfront suite." I opened my bank history again. Yes, the $450 a night price point wasn't for a standard room. I screenshotted the hotel name and address from the e-receipt. It was located right on South Beach, a busy tourist area, but also a place where it was easy to blend in if you didn't know anyone. I saved everything. This was no longer about feelings. It was about evidence. The plane landed in Miami shortly after 7 a.m. The air was humid and salty, a stark contrast to Chicago. But I had no time to notice. I got in an Uber and gave the driver the hotel address. On the way, I stared out the window, my heart strangely calm. The shaking was gone, the panic replaced by a distinct coldness. I knew from this moment on everything would change. The hotel appeared not a massive high-rise, but a chic boutique building tucked behind a row of palm trees. I pulled my mask up, put on my sunglasses, and walked in like any other guest. The lobby was sleek, and the staff greeted me politely. I didn't ask any questions. I just observed. If they were here, they would have to come out eventually. They couldn't hide in their room forever. I booked a room on a lower floor, saying I was in town for a few days on business. After checking in, I went to my room, dropped my bag, and immediately returned to the lobby. I found a discreet corner, ordered a coffee, and kept my eyes fixed on the elevators. Time crawled by. Every person who stepped out made my heart skip a beat, but it was never them. Around 9 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was my brother-in-law, Scott. I stared at the screen for a few seconds before answering. "Hey, Alice, are you back yet? Just calling to check in." His voice was normal without a hint of suspicion. I paused for a second before asking, "Where's Grace?" Scott answered immediately. "Oh, she's visiting her parents for a few days. Aren't you back yet?" I clenched the phone. Another lie. It wasn't just my husband. My sister-in-law was deceiving her own husband too. I replied lightly, "Okay, just asking," and hung up. That answer made everything even clearer. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was a carefully concealed relationship planned and agreed upon by both of them. I sat there holding the coffee cup, unable to take a sip. Around 10 minutes, the elevator doors opened and I saw them. Dean walked out first, wearing a white polo and loafers, looking relaxed, nothing like a man on a business trip. Behind him was Grace. She wore a sundress, her hair tied up, sunglasses in her hand. They weren't holding hands or embracing, but the space between them was too close to be just family. They walked side by side, talking softly and laughing. I sat frozen. Even though I had prepared myself, the moment I saw them together in the flesh was like a physical blow to the chest. I gripped my hands so tightly my nails dug into my palms, but I didn't stand up. I didn't rush over. I just watched until there were no illusions left. They walked right past me without a glance. I ducked my head, pretending to look at my phone. When they were out the door, I finally looked up. My heart was pounding, but my mind was clearer than ever. I knew if I confronted them now, it would all end immediately. But I didn't want just the two of them to know the truth. I wanted everyone to see it. I got up and walked outside, keeping enough distance to go unnoticed. They hailed a ride and I got in another one, telling the driver to follow them. The car moved along the coast. Through the window, I saw them get out at a busy seafood restaurant on the water. They chose an outdoor table near the beach. I sat at a table further back, far enough to see clearly without being seen. They ate, they talked, and occasionally Grace would laugh, her hand lightly touching Dean's arm. Small gestures, but enough to confirm everything. Not siblings, not an accident. This was intimate, familiar, something that had happened many times before. I quietly took out my phone and snapped a few pictures. Not as memories, but as proof. Every time I pressed the shutter, I could feel my hand shaking. But I did it anyway because I knew from this moment on, I was no longer the naive wife. About an hour later, they left. I didn't follow them this time. I went back to the hotel, went to my room, and locked the door. This time, I sat down on the bed and took a deep breath. The image of them together was burned into my mind. No denying it, no excuses. I opened my phone and looked at my contact list, my mother-in-law, father-in-law, my own parents, and Scott. My finger hovered over the screen. If I stayed silent, I could file for divorce, quietly, walk away, and end it all with minimal drama. But no, I couldn't accept them betraying me, betraying their family, and then going on to live their lives as if nothing happened. I called my mother-in-law. After a few rings, she picked up. "Alice, dear." Her voice was normal. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my own voice steady. "Mom, I need to tell you something, but you have to stay calm." The other end was silent for a few seconds. "What is it, dear?" I looked out the window at the dazzlingly blue Miami ocean. I spoke slowly, enunciating each word. "I'm in Miami, and I just saw Dean with Grace." The line went dead quiet. Not a sound. I continued. "It's not a coincidence. It's not a misunderstanding. I have proof." My mother-in-law's voice trembled. "What? What are you saying?" I closed my eyes for a second, then opened them. "If you believe me, please come here. I want everyone to see for themselves." It was the first time in my life I had deliberately dragged both families into something so painful. But I knew this was just the beginning, because this time, I didn't just want to know the truth, I wanted to expose it. After hanging up, I sat motionless for a long time. The phone was still in my hand, but my mind was coldly clear. If just a few hours ago I was still wondering if I was overthinking things, now everything was undeniable. But what made me decide not to stop was how calmly they were enjoying everything, as if nothing was wrong. I couldn't accept them betraying me, and then returning to play the roles of the devoted husband and the sweet sister-in-law in front of the family. No, if the truth existed, it had to be seen. My phone rang again. It was my mother-in-law. I answered her voice, now audibly shaking. "Alice, tell me again. Are you really in Miami?" I replied curtly. "Yes." She continued, her voice filled with disbelief. "And Dean, you saw him." I clenched the phone, remembering the morning scene in vivid detail. "I saw him. He's not alone. He's with Grace." The line went silent. I could hear her heavy breathing, then a stifled sob. "It can't be. He wouldn't do that." I didn't explain further. I knew for a parent, especially a mother, accepting that her son could do such a thing was incredibly difficult. But I also knew there was only one way to make her believe. I lowered my voice, speaking each word slowly. "Mom, I don't want to just tell you. I want you to see it for yourself." A few seconds of silence, then she asked quietly, "What do you mean?" I looked out the window where the Miami sea was still a brilliant blue. "Come here. I will take everyone to them." This time she didn't argue. Just a soft reply. "Okay, I'll come." The call ended, but I knew from that moment this was no longer just my private matter. I wasn't dragging the family in to make a scene. I was doing it because I knew without them the truth would be twisted. I stood up and walked out onto the balcony. The sea breeze was strong, but it did nothing to cool the feeling in my chest. A question flickered through my mind: if I chose silence, chose divorce, chose to just walk away, would things be easier? Maybe. But I would have to live the rest of my life wondering why I was the one who had to suffer in silence, and I didn't want that. That afternoon, I continued to watch them. Not because I still had doubts, but because I needed to be certain of everything: what they were doing, where they were, and when. Around 4 p.m., they appeared in the hotel lobby. Dean wore a light-colored button-down shirt, his hair neatly styled, looking every bit like a man on vacation. Grace was beside him in a light dress, her makeup subtle, her face so relaxed it made my stomach churn. They didn't hold hands, but the space between them was no longer that of relatives. I sat in a hidden corner pretending to look at my phone, but I was watching their every move. At one point, Grace leaned in close to say something, and Dean tilted his head to listen, then smiled. A smile I once thought was reserved for me. I memorized it all, not to inflict more pain on myself, but to be sure I wasn't mistaken. They left, and I didn't follow. I had everything I needed. That evening, my father called. His voice was deep and concise. "Alice, your mother said something is urgent. Does it have to do with your husband?" I was silent for a moment, then replied yes. That one word was enough for him to understand the gravity of the situation. "Where are you, Miami?" "Okay, we're on our way. No more questions, no blame, no doubt." That was my father's way. When his daughter needed him, he acted. I could hear my mother in the background, asking urgent questions, but he didn't explain. I hung up, a strange feeling rising in my chest. Not relief, but certainty. Everything was moving in the direction I had chosen. Around 9 p.m., my mother-in-law called again. "Alice, I've booked the tickets. Your father-in-law, Scott, and I will be there in the morning." I nodded, though she couldn't see. "Okay." She hesitated. "Alice, I'm still hoping there's been some kind of mistake." I looked out into the darkness, my voice calm. "Tomorrow you'll know." I said nothing more. Words were meaningless now. Only the truth could answer. After hanging up, I went back to my room, sat on the bed, and reviewed all the evidence, the messages, the photos, the transactions. I organized everything, saving it to my phone and emailing it to myself. I didn't want to take any chances. Not because I was afraid of losing it, but because I wanted that when everyone stood before them, no one could claim it was just a misunderstanding. Around 1 a.m., I was still awake. I lay staring at the ceiling, my mind no longer chaotic, but chillingly clear. I thought about tomorrow, when both sets of parents would be in the same place, when a husband would see his wife with his own brother, when a mother would see her son's betrayal, when everything they tried to hide would be stripped bare. I felt no satisfaction, no joy. I just felt it was necessary. My phone lay beside me, Dean's name still in my contacts. I didn't call, didn't text. I didn't want to hear another word, because I knew that right now all words were pointless. Only actions would decide everything. I closed my eyes but didn't sleep. A single thought remained in my head, clear and decisive. Tomorrow they will arrive, and tomorrow night I will take them to see it all. No more texts, no more guessing, no more chances to deny, only the truth. And this time, I wouldn't let anyone stand steady in front of it. The next morning, I was at the airport very early, not to leave but to pick them up. The flight from Chicago landed just before 9 a.m., and for the first time in my life, I felt every minute stretch into an eternity. I stood in the arrivals area, phone in hand, but doing nothing, my eyes fixed on the gate. The painful images from the day before were gone, replaced by a clear-headed preparation for what was about to happen. I knew that when they walked through that gate, I would no longer be the woman who only knew how to endure. I would be the one to lead them all to the truth. The gate opened and people began to stream out. Then I saw them. My parents first, followed by my mother-in-law, father-in-law, and finally Scott. No one was talking, no one was smiling. Every face was tense, as if they already sensed something terrible was waiting for them. My mother saw me first and hurried over, grabbing my hand tightly, her eyes full of questions. She didn't speak. I just gave a slight nod, the shortest possible answer. My mother-in-law walked more slowly, her face pale, her eyes red and swollen as if she'd been crying the entire flight. When she stood before me, she didn't ask anything, just gripped my other hand tightly, as if holding on to something to keep from collapsing. Scott stood behind them, his face a mask of confusion, clearly still not understanding the full picture. I looked at them all and said a single sentence. "Everyone follow me." No one asked questions, no one objected. They just followed me silently, as if they had already accepted they were about to step into something they weren't ready to face. On the ride to the hotel, the silence was suffocating. The sound of the engine, the traffic outside, all became uncomfortably loud. My mother sat beside me, still holding my hand as if trying to give me strength, or perhaps needing it for herself. My mother-in-law sat in the front, staring straight ahead but seeing nothing, as if trying to deny everything in her mind. Scott kept looking at me in the rearview mirror, his eyes filled with doubt, but also a very clear fear. He had probably started to guess something, but still didn't dare to believe it. I said nothing the entire way. I knew words were meaningless now. Only the truth would make them understand. When the car stopped in front of the hotel, everyone paused for a beat. No one got out immediately. It was as if opening the car door would officially begin everything. I was the first one out. I turned and looked at each of them. Everyone just walk inside and act normal. Don't ask questions, don't make a scene. I will bring you to them at the right moment. My voice was calm and clear without a tremor. My father nodded. My mother squeezed my hand one last time. My mother-in-law just followed silently like a ghost. We entered the hotel lobby. The luxurious space, the faint scent of perfume, the soft music, it was all a complete contrast to our tense atmosphere. I led them to the waiting area, choosing a corner that was hidden but had a clear view of the elevators. "They're here," I said softly. That sentence cut through the silence like a knife. My mother-in-law shuddered, her hands clenched so tight her knuckles were white. Scott turned to me, his confusion finally breaking. "Alice, what are you talking about?" I didn't answer right away. I opened my phone and showed him one of the pictures I had taken. Just one, but it was enough. The color drained from Scott's face in an instant. He stared at the screen, then looked up at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. "No, that's impossible." I kept my voice steady. "You'll see for yourself." The silence returned, but this time it was not the silence of doubt, but the silence of dread. Time passed slowly. Every time the elevator doors opened, everyone tensed up only to be let down. My mother-in-law started breathing heavily, clutching her chest as if she couldn't take the pressure. My mother had to sit close and support her. My father remained silent, but his expression had changed. The doubt was gone, replaced by a barely suppressed rage. Scott couldn't sit still anymore. He stood up, paced a few steps, then sat back down, running his hands through his hair in agitation. I watched them, feeling no sense of victory or satisfaction, only a heavy weight. But I held firm to my decision, because without this moment, they would never believe. Around 6 p.m., my phone vibrated. It was a text from an unknown number, but I knew who it was. "We're heading out for dinner." I didn't reply, but it told me one thing: they were about to appear. I stood up and whispered, "Get ready." Everyone immediately tensed. No one spoke, but I could feel each person's heartbeat quicken. And then the elevator doors opened. Dean stepped out first with the same relaxed posture as always. Behind him was Grace. In that moment, the world seemed to freeze. No one moved, no one spoke. There was only the truth, walking step by step towards all of us. And this time, no one could turn back. The elevator doors opened, and in that instant, I knew none of us could ever go back. Dean stepped out first, hands in his pockets, looking as comfortable as any man enjoying a vacation. Grace followed, adjusting her hair as she walked out, a smile lingering on her lips. They had no idea that just a few yards away, their entire family was standing there waiting. 1 second, 2 seconds. No one said a word. The air was so thick you could choke on it. I looked at my mother-in-law and saw her hands start to tremble, her eyes fixed on her son in disbelief. Scott was frozen, his face pale, his lips moving, but no sound coming out. My father clenched his jaw while my mother squeezed my hand until it hurt. I took one step forward. Not quickly, not rushed, but enough for them to see me. Dean was the first to notice. His eyes locked on me, his expression shifting from surprise to panic. "Alice!" His voice caught in his throat. By now, Grace had looked up, and when her eyes met mine, the color drained from her face. But the shock didn't end there, because standing right behind me was everyone else. My mother-in-law stepped forward, her legs unsteady, but she forced herself onward. "Dean," she choked out, her voice breaking. Dean was rooted to the spot, his eyes darting from me to his mother to his father, finally landing on Scott. And that was the moment I saw the complete collapse in his eyes. "Mom, why? Why is everyone here?" No one answered. He knew the question was meaningless. Scott took a step forward, his gaze fixed on Grace. "Explain this," he said, his voice raspy. Grace took half a step back, a primal instinct to flee, but there was only a wall behind her. No escape. She couldn't form a complete sentence. I looked at the scene, the initial pain now replaced by a chilling detachment. I raised my phone, my voice terrifyingly calm. "Or should I explain it for you?" Dean immediately lunged forward. "Alice, just listen to me." I stepped back, avoiding his touch. "Don't touch me." My words made the tension in the room even thicker. I turned to my mother-in-law and handed her the phone. "Mom, look." She took it with trembling hands, her eyes scanning the messages, the photos. Within seconds, tears streamed down her face. "Oh God," she whispered, stumbling backward, nearly falling before my mother caught her. Why? Why? My own son." She couldn't finish the sentence, but everyone understood. My father-in-law finally spoke, his voice low and heavy as stone. "Tell me, Dean, what is this?" Dean was silent. There were no more denials, no more explanations. Scott turned to Grace, his voice no longer confused, but laced with pain and rage. "You, tell me." "What is this?" Grace burst into tears. "I'm sorry." Just those 2 words, but they were like a knife straight to Scott's heart. He let out a twisted, broken laugh. "Sorry," he repeated, his voice cracking. You sleep with my brother, and you say you're sorry. No one intervened. Everyone was drowning in the shock. Dean finally spoke, his voice low. It's not what you think, I laughed. For the first time since this all began, I laughed, but it was a bitter, hollow sound. Not what you think. I looked straight at him. Then tell me, what is it? He fell silent. There was no answer that could save this. My mother-in-law walked forward and without warning raised her hand and slapped Dean across the face. Crack. The sound echoed through the lobby. Everyone froze. I raised you, I educated you for you to do this, she screamed, tears streaming down her face. Dean didn't flinch, didn't react. He just stood there, head bowed. My father-in-law turned away, unable to look, but I saw his hands shaking. Scott couldn't take it anymore. He lunged forward and grabbed his brother by the collar. Are you insane? He spat out each word. That's my wife. Dean didn't resist. I'm sorry. Shut up, Scott screamed, shoving him away. Grace had collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, but no one went to her. Her tears had no value now. I stood watching it all, then spoke slowly. My voice wasn't loud, but it was enough to silence everyone. All right. All eyes turned to me. You've all seen it. I looked directly at Dean. Do you have anything else to say? He looked at me, his eyes showing true fear for the first time. But I didn't need his answer anymore. I turned to walk away because I knew in that moment it was all over. Not because of my decision, but because the truth had spoken for itself. And this time, no one could stand against it. After my mother-in-law's slap, the scene shattered. But the most terrifying thing wasn't the noise. It was the profound silence that followed. No one spoke, but everyone understood there was no coming back from this. I stood there looking at each face, each pair of eyes, and realized that the initial shock was just the surface. The real truth ran much deeper. I turned back to Dean, my voice still steady. Tell me, how long has this been going on? My question, though, quiet, commanded everyone's attention. He was silent for a few seconds, as if weighing his options, looking for the least painful answer. Then he exhaled, his voice hoarse. About 6 months. No one reacted immediately, but I saw the light go out in Scott's eyes. 6 months, he repeated, his voice incredulous. So, for all that time, you and I, he trailed off. But the meaning was brutally clear. Grace kept her head down, tears dripping onto the marble floor, but no one was moved by them anymore. I pressed on, not rushing, but each question forcing them to face the reality. When did it start? Dean wouldn't look at me. He stared at the floor. The family trip to Hawaii. I froze for a second. That trip. I remembered it clearly. It was a rare vacation we all took together. I remembered having to leave a day early for work while they all stayed behind. I closed my eyes for a second, then opened them. When I wasn't there, he didn't answer. His silence was the answer. My mother-in-law began to sob louder. Oh my God. Right in front of the family, you two were doing this. She clutched her chest, struggling to breathe. My father-in-law said nothing, but his expression had shifted from disappointment to cold fury. Scott could no longer contain himself. He lunged at Grace, grabbing her by the arms. Why? He growled. Was I not good to you? Grace shook her head, tears smearing her face. No, it's not that. Then why? The question hung in the air unanswered. I looked at the scene, then turned to Dean. Explain it. He was quiet for a long moment before uttering a sentence that left everyone stunned. I didn't mean for it to happen. I let out a sharp, bitter laugh. You didn't mean for it to happen, I stared at him. A 6-month affair, a vacation together, booking hotel suites. And you say you didn't mean for it to happen? He didn't argue. He knew how pathetic it sounded. Grace finally spoke, her voice trembling. At first we were just talking, and then gradually I cut her off. And then gradually you started sleeping together. My blunt words silenced her. Scott let go of her arms and stumbled back as if he'd been struck. You two hid this from me for 6 months, he said, looking at Dean with utter despair. You're my brother. Dean closed his eyes, unable to meet his gaze. I'm sorry. Don't say you're sorry, Scott yelled. Does sorry fix any of this? No one answered, because it didn't. I stood there listening to every word, but the initial sharp pain was gone. Perhaps because I had prepared for this. But there was one thing I couldn't let go. I looked at Grace, my voice turning to ice. And you. What were you thinking when you did this? She looked up, her eyes red. I didn't think it would turn out like this. I cut her off again. You didn't think or you thought no one would ever find out. Her silence was the answer. I turned to everyone. You've all heard it. I wasn't shouting, I wasn't crying, I was simply stating a fact. This wasn't a one-time thing. It wasn't a mistake. It was a conscious, ongoing relationship. The lobby fell silent again, but this time it was the silence of a truth fully exposed. My mother-in-law sank into a chair as if her strength had vanished. "What's left of this family?" she mumbled. My father-in-law turned to me, speaking to me directly for the first time. "What are you going to do?" The question made everyone look at me. I knew this was my moment to decide, but I wasn't in a hurry. I looked at Dean one last time. "Do you have anything else to say?" He shook his head. There were no words left. I gave a slight nod. "Good." I turned to Scott, who was standing there, his eyes red but dry. "You decide what to do with your marriage." Then I turned to my own parents. "I will too." No one tried to stop me, no one offered advice. They all understood. After what had just happened, there were no other options. I walked out of the lobby without looking back. But I knew that behind me, a family had just completely imploded. And this time it wasn't because of a misunderstanding. It was because the truth had been dragged into the light. I had only taken a few steps out of the lobby when a sound of shattering erupted behind me. Not of objects breaking, but of a family falling to pieces. "Wait," Scott's voice, raw and strained, cut through the air. I stopped, but didn't immediately turn around. I knew if I did, I'd have to witness the collapse all over again, but I turned anyway. Scott was standing in the middle of the lobby, his eyes bloodshot, staring at Dean as if he were a stranger. "Tell me clearly. Why her?" No one intervened. This was no longer my fight, it was theirs. Dean stood motionless, his shoulders slumped. I lost control. Scott let out a short, bitter laugh. "Lost control. You're a man, not an animal." Dean didn't respond. He had nothing left to say. Grace was still on the floor, her sobs reduced to silent heaving gasps. But Scott wasn't looking at her. He was looking at his brother. "You know," he said, his voice trembling, "since I got married, I always thought you were the one person I could trust most in this world. But it turns out the person who stabbed me in the back was you." The air grew heavy. My mother-in-law began to cry again, this time without restraint. "Stop it! Don't say any more." But Scott didn't stop. He turned to Grace, his gaze so cold it chilled me. "You told me you loved me. You said you wanted to build a family with me." He didn't continue, just shook his head, unable to find the right words. Grace looked up and crawled forward, her hand touching Scott's shoe. "I was wrong. I was so wrong." Scott jerked his foot away as if burned. "Don't touch me," he choked out. "You disgust me." Those words were the final blow, severing whatever remained between them. Grace froze, then collapsed, sobbing silently. I stood there watching and realized that no one resembled their former selves. Not the husband, the wife, the son, the brother, just broken people facing the consequences of their actions. My father-in-law stepped forward, his voice low but commanding. "Enough." Everyone fell silent. He looked at Dean, his eyes no longer angry, but filled with a profound disappointment. "From this day on, you are no longer my son." The words landed with the weight of stones. My mother-in-law gasped. "What are you saying?" But he didn't look at her. He looked only at his son. "I will not have a son like you." Dean closed his eyes but didn't protest. He knew he deserved it. My mother-in-law, unable to bear it, stumbled over and lightly beat her husband's chest. "How can you say that? He's still our child." "Our child." He shot back at her, his voice sharp for the first time. "He does something like this. And you still call him our child." She fell silent tears, her only answer. I turned to my own parents. My mother looked at me, her eyes filled with pain. "Are you okay, honey?" I nodded. "I'm okay." But I knew that okay was just a facade. Inside, everything had irrevocably changed. My father came to stand beside me, his voice firm and steady. "Let's go home." I nodded. But before I left, I turned back one last time to look at Dean, the man who was my husband, the man I had trusted for 5 years, now a complete stranger. "You don't need to apologize," I said calmly, "because I don't need it anymore." He looked at me, his eyes empty, but I didn't wait for a reply. I turned and walked away. "Thanks for watching." This time, I didn't stop. Behind me, the sounds of crying, arguing, and breaking continued. But I didn't look back, because I knew if I did, I would be pulled back in, and I couldn't let that happen. I stepped out of the hotel. The humid air hit me, but it brought no relief. It only made it clearer that everything was over. Not with a piece of paper, not with a conversation, but in the moment, the truth was laid bare for all to see. I got in the car with my parents. No one said a word the whole way, but I knew that from this day forward, my life would turn in a new direction. One I didn't choose, but one I had to walk. And this time, I would walk it alone. I didn't go back to the hotel. That night, my parents and I checked into a different one, smaller, quieter. No one asked me what my next steps were. They understood that after everything, there was only one path forward, an ending, but I was the one who had to say it. I sat in the room looking out at the city lights of Miami, still shining as brightly as ever, but inside I felt a strange emptiness. Not pain, not anger, just a clear, final feeling closure. My phone buzzed repeatedly. Dean's name flashed on the screen. I watched it but didn't answer. By the fifth call, I turned the phone off completely. Not because I was afraid to hear his voice, but because there was nothing left to hear. Apologies were meaningless now. The next morning, I woke up early. I showered, put on a simple outfit, and applied light makeup. Looking at my reflection, I saw a different person. Not the woman from yesterday, not the wife who trusted her husband, but someone who had made her decision. I turned to my parents. I want to see him one last time. My father nodded. I'll go with you. I shook my head. No need. I can do this myself. He looked at me for a moment, then relented. He understood. This was something I had to finish on my own. I called Dean. This time he answered immediately. Alice, where are you? I cut him off. The coffee shop downstairs from the old hotel. 30 minutes. I didn't wait for a reply or listen for another word. I hung up, grabbed my purse, and walked out. When I arrived, he was already there. His face was gaunt, his eyes red. He clearly hadn't slept. But seeing him stirred no emotion in me. I sat down opposite him without a greeting, without a question, just a few seconds of silence. He spoke first. I'm so sorry. I looked him straight in the eye. How many times have you said that now? He fell silent. I continued. And do you think it means anything? He lowered his head, unable to answer. I took a folder out of my purse and placed it on the table. Divorce papers. I've already had them drawn up. His hand froze. Alice, please just listen to me. I cut him off again, my voice steady. I don't want to fight. I don't want to make a scene, but I won't drag this out. I pointed to the papers. We have the condo we bought together valued at about $600,000. I'll take half. The savings are about $150,000. We split that. The car is in your name. You can keep it. We have no kids. So it's not complicated. I spoke as if I were negotiating a business deal devoid of emotion, without hesitation. Dean looked at me, his eyes filled with desperation. Can't you give me another chance? I gave a small, humorless laugh, a chance. I looked straight at him. You had 6 months to stop. He was silent. You had dozens of chances to tell the truth, I continued. But you chose to keep going. So now I have no reason to give you another chance. His hand trembled as he picked up the pen. I don't want to lose you. I didn't reply. Those words came far too late. He looked at me one last time as if hoping to find a hint of hesitation in my eyes, but there was none. I met his gaze with a calm that seemed to break him. He signed. The pen strokes were uneven but decisive. When the pen lifted from the paper, I knew it was officially over. I took the papers and put them back in my purse. Without another word, I stood up to leave. He called out Alice. I paused but didn't turn around. I really am sorry. I said softly, my voice light but clear, save that apology for the next person. Then I walked away without looking back, without hesitating. This time I knew I wasn't running away. I was leaving with a decision I had made for myself. When I stepped out of the coffee shop, I took a deep breath. The morning air was cool, but it didn't lighten my spirit. It only made it clearer that everything was finished. No more ties, no more responsibility, no more trust left to lose. I returned to the hotel. My parents looked at me but asked no questions. I said only one thing. It's done. My mother hugged me. This time I didn't pull away, but I didn't cry. Tears couldn't change anything. That afternoon, I booked our flight back to Chicago. As the plane took off, I looked down at the city below. Miami was still beautiful. The ocean still blue. But for me, this place would forever mark an ending and a new beginning. After returning to Chicago, I didn't contact anyone from my husband's family for nearly a week. Not because I was avoiding them, but because I had nothing left to say. Everything that needed to be said had been said in Miami. Everything that needed to be seen had been exposed. I threw myself back into work almost immediately. My days were filled with meetings, my evenings spent at home. Life surprisingly fell back into a normal rhythm. Colleagues noticed I'd lost weight and asked if I was okay. I just smiled and said I'd been busy. No one knew I had just walked away from a shattered marriage, and I didn't want them to. But my silence didn't mean things were quiet on the other side. On the contrary, their world was fracturing. The first person to call was Scott. I stared at the screen for a few moments before answering. The line was silent for so long I thought he'd hung up. Alice, he finally said, his voice hoarse as if from days without sleep. I signed the papers. I knew what papers he meant. Okay, I replied simply. He continued, his voice slow. I couldn't save it, and I didn't want to. I offered no words of comfort. They would have felt hollow. She's moved back in with her parents, Scott added. They're not happy with her either. They know everything. I nodded slightly, though he couldn't see. A wrongful relationship once exposed doesn't just destroy two people. It drags down both families. Dean. Scott hesitated. He's not doing well. I remained silent, not asking for details, but Scott continued as if he needed to get it out. My parents won't let him come home anymore. My dad said he considers him dead to him. I listened without any distinct emotion. Not because I was cold, but because I was past the point of pain. What was happening now was merely the consequence. Has he called you? Scott asked. He has, but I haven't answered, I replied. There was a pause. You're really strong. I didn't respond. I didn't feel strong. I was just doing what had to be done. After that call, I knew things were unfolding as I'd expected. But the next call surprised me. It was from my mother-in-law. I saw her name and hesitated for a moment before picking up. Alice, her voice was much weaker than before. I'm so sorry. I didn't interrupt. She went on, her voice thick with emotion. I failed as a mother. I let him become this person. I closed my eyes for a second. This was the first time she had taken my side completely. It's not your fault, I said. She began to cry, no longer holding back. But I've lost everything, Alice. I understood. She hadn't just lost a daughter-in-law and her family's reputation. She had lost faith in her own son. He's like a ghost now, she continued. He doesn't go to work. He doesn't eat. He just sits there. I was silent. A part of me felt a pang of sorrow, but another part remained clear. This was his choice. If you have any feelings left for him, she stammered. Could you talk to him one more time? I sighed softly. Mom, I've said everything I need to say. My voice wasn't cold, but it was final. Nothing I say now can change anything. She was quiet, then whispered, Yes, I understand. The call ended. I put my phone down and sat in silence for a long time. Not because I was wavering, but because I realized the consequences didn't just stop with them. They rippled outward, affecting everyone around them. Even so, I had no regrets. A week later, I heard from a mutual friend that Dean's business partner had canceled a major contract with him. Not because of his work, but because of the scandal. In business, reputation is everything. And no one wanted to partner with someone embroiled in that kind of drama. I read the message and then deleted it. No comment, no reaction. But I knew it was just the beginning. As for Grace, I heard she didn't dare leave her house. Her family was also affected. Neighbors gossiped, acquaintances asked questions. A private matter had now spread like an uncontrollable rumor. I hadn't told anyone, but there were too many witnesses at the hotel that day. One evening, my phone rang again. It was Dean's number. I stared at it for a long time, and for the first time I answered. The line was quiet, just the sound of breathing. Alice, he said, his voice raw. I've lost everything. I didn't respond. My job, my family, you. He laughed a dry, broken sound. I have nothing left. I listened but felt nothing but a void. He paused. I just want to ask. Did you ever truly love me? The question made me close my eyes for a second. Then I opened them and answered softly. Yes. He was silent. I continued. But you destroyed it. Nothing more needed to be said. That was enough. I hung up. This time I knew it was the last. I put the phone down and looked out the window. The city was the same, life went on. Only one thing had changed forever. I was no longer the woman I was a year ago, and they were no longer the people I once knew. The consequences had begun, and no one could escape them. 6 months after I left Miami, my life had changed in a way I never expected. It wasn't a loud, dramatic transformation, not the kind of reinvention you read about in stories. It was a quiet, slow, but undeniable shift. I moved into a smaller apartment in a quieter neighborhood. It wasn't the spacious condo I once thought was my forever home, but it felt lighter. Less stuff, fewer memories, fewer ties. My career was stable better even. I took on a major new project which made me busier, but my mind was clearer. There were no more calls to explain, no more texts to wait for, no more feeling of unease that the person next to you wasn't who you thought they were. People would ask if I felt lonely being alone. I'd just smile. There was sadness, yes, but it wasn't the suffocating kind. It was a gentle sadness, enough to remind me that I had once loved truly, but also enough to keep me from ever going back. I had no contact with Dean. After that final call, I blocked his number. Not out of anger, but out of necessity. Some relationships, once they're over, need to stay over completely. I never saw Grace again either. I heard she moved out of the city to escape the stares and the gossip. As for Scott, he still texted me occasionally to check in. The messages were short, infrequent, but enough for me to know he was slowly healing. Everyone had their own way of moving on, and so did I. One afternoon, as I was sitting in my favorite coffee shop, a text from an unknown number appeared on my phone. I was about to ignore it, but for some reason I opened it. The message was short. Dean and Grace broke up. No signature was needed. I knew who it was from. I stared at the message for a few seconds. I wasn't surprised, nor did I feel anything in particular. It was as if I'd known it would happen all along. A relationship that begins in deceit rarely ends in happiness. I didn't reply. I deleted the message and put my phone down. Outside it had started to rain, the drops blurring the view through the window. I sat there looking out into the distance, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt truly at peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because I had accepted everything that had happened. I no longer asked myself, why me? I no longer felt resentment or regret. I simply understood one thing. Some truths, no matter how painful, need to be seen. If I had chosen silence that day, chosen to look the other way, chosen to believe the lies, I might still be living in a fake marriage believing I was happy. But the price for that illusion would have been my entire life. I chose to endure the pain once rather than live a lie forever. I stood up, paid my bill, and walked outside. The rain had stopped, and the air was cool and fresh. I took a deep breath, feeling the simple rhythm of my own breathing. It was no longer heavy, no longer suppressed. It was just me. On the busy street, no one knew what I had been through. But they didn't need to. I knew. And that was enough. Before this story ends, I just want to say one thing. If you've listened this far, perhaps you have been, are, or will be in a similar situation. You might feel pain, you might lose faith, you might feel like your world is collapsing. But remember, you always have a choice. The choice to confront or to hide. The choice to leave or to stay. And sometimes the hardest choice is the right one. As for me, I have no regrets. At least I dared to face the truth and walk away from it on my own 2 feet.